Hi, everybody. This is Matthew Poes of Poes Acoustics, and we're answering questions. This was not so much a question, but I'll answer it anyway because he gave a $2 donation, and that's what we do. So on the really serious video, Simpson Bergman, 2185, said, $2, thanks. And then he asked the question a little bit after that. He said, I remember when I watched your video, how to do room measurements using REW software. I was aware that wavelets are used in signal processing applications, but that was the first time I'd seen them being used, or I saw them being used in evaluating, calibrating up an audio system near the end of the video. That was really interesting. So I'm assuming nothing was cut off, and that's the whole comment, and so it's not really a question, but I'll just kind of get into this. Most of you know that when you're trying to make a system sound right, what you want is for sound to arrive at all frequencies to the listener at the same time. And a fully coherent speaker would do that. Now, you have this issue that sound waves get longer and longer and longer as they get lower in frequency. And so sometimes time coincidence is not possible, but if you can at least maintain phase and have it be such that at those lower frequencies, what's following is immediately following the next driver so that the peaks still are generally in alignment with each other. Well, so most of that ends up being handled by the designer of the speakers and the crossover, but with the subwoofers, it's a little bit more complicated. You, the person putting your system together, or the calibrator ultimately has to get the integration of the subs and the mains right. All of these concepts apply at any frequency and could be used there, but measuring them in room becomes really complicated at high frequencies. At low frequencies, it's not that hard, given the length of these wavelengths, to be able to look at the point of integration between the main speakers and the subs at, say, 80 hertz. And one of the things that you've got going on here, not one of the things you've got going on here are these three factors. You've got, because specifically of the phase, you've got the way that the frequency, the amplitude response looks at that integration point. And when the phase is not right, what you'll see is that the response will either bump up or dip down in that range. And it won't necessarily be just at the crossover point. It can happen outside of the crossover point too, especially when sometimes you have with the subwoofer might have some peaks in the response up higher that are not shaped out properly. You've got some peaks in the lower response, maybe a resonance or something in the main speaker. And so that can cause some issues too. And so there's all this shaping you have to do to get the integration just right. And the biggest one tends to be that phase relationship between the subwoofer and the mains. Now, the other thing is that there is a general assumption that the bass is hitting you at the same time from the subwoofer as it does from the mains at that integration point, and that there's a very smooth transition into the natural longer point in time that it takes for this to happen, because there's always going to be this group delay issue where as you get to the bandwidth limit of the system, group delay goes up and up and up. And so you see the point in time in which you see a peak in energy start to do this being time. So it starts to, as you go down in frequency, it's going to curve out into more and more and more time. And I've shown these graphs, I think, before, but not in a long time on these videos, and I probably need to do that. So what you've got going on now is that you want this phase to be right. But in theory, any doubling of the period at that frequency point, so at 100 hertz, it's about 10 milliseconds. So you could do it at 0, at 10, at 20, and you'll always be phase matched. But then the bass is hitting you after from the subwoofer that it does from the mains. And so in the peak energy, you'd see this jut out happen. So a wavelet is a way of looking at peak energy. And what that means is that you can look at things from the amplitude response standpoint, the phase standpoint, and the time standpoint in a very logical, easy way. So wavelets are just a way of visualizing it. You're not processing it in a special way. It requires special processing to produce the wavelet, but the wavelet isn't giving you something that you didn't have any other way. It's just an easy way of visualizing what's going on. And it allows you to ensure that you've got everything matched. So I had thought that this was me being goofy. I saw it in a training from Listening, I'm pretty sure. I may have this wrong, but I think they had a white paper on it, and then they did a training, and I went to the training. And I remember I watched the whole thing and I'm like, that is so cool. And then I got the price on the software from them and I'm like, I can't afford that. And I took the idea and I thought, I wonder if I could do this using other software. And I remembered that there was this wavelet feature in the spectrogram in REW. And so I took a look at it and I played around with the settings until I got something that looked like what Listen Inc. was showing in the presentation that I looked at. And I apologize, Listen Inc., if I have this incorrect. I thought it was you guys who had shown this. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. It looks like about the same. And then I started taking measurements, and then I tried to interpret them the way I was shown. And I sent some messages back to John Mulcahy as well about it. And he said that I was, roughly doing it right that way. He said there's other ways you could do that within the software, but that's correct too. And I played around with it. And then I started using it to get alignment right. Originally, I used actually just a pair of speakers. In fact, I remember this because I did it for a presentation. It was a pair of Klipsch towers that James Larson had reviewed. He brought them to me and he goes, I know you hate Klipsch, but I think you'll like these more than you expect. And he was right. They sounded a lot better than I expected them to. They were not a bad speaker for the money. So we brought them into the room and we listened to it for a while. And then I had this subwoofer. In fact, I have it in this room, not doing anything. It was a Martin Logan. I think it's the Dynamo 1100X, but basically it's a 12-inch sealed sub. And I had an integrated amplifier that had bass management. And I was trying to get everything all set up. It was a Yamaha integrated amplifier so that it measured really well. And I got it to a point where the frequency response was pretty good, but it didn't sound all that good. And I had heard the bass sound better. And one of the weird things was it seemed like when I turned the mains off and just listened to the subwoofer, the bass actually sounded better straight from the subwoofer than it did when everything was together. So then I thought it was the Klipsch, and I started playing with the settings. And then I noticed that the bass was like way out of alignment. So I went into the settings and I figured out how I could make it so that things aligned better in the time domain, basically, by getting the peak time energy curve to be nice and smooth. And I kept making incremental improvements, and it did weird things. And I'll just tell you right now, if you guys do this, you'll see it do the same thing. If you do like 1 millisecond shifts, what happens for some reason is like it'll look like it's getting better, and then all of a sudden it gets way worse, and then it starts to get better again. And I don't know why. I don't know enough about this to really explain why. Sometimes it'll actually shoot around on you, but it does. And all of a sudden I found this setting that was like the magic setting. And I remember writing it down carefully because it seemed like you would change it again a little bit and it would actually get off, like it would be wrong. And then you'd have to change it back. And it's like, okay, so I got it to a point where it was like stable and it was good. And I listened and it sounded like it did when I had the speakers off in the bass. But now, of course, it was a full range system and I liked it better. And I told James Larson, he's like, you're full of it. There's no way that does anything useful. There's no way you can hear that. And my theory was that what I had basically done is kind of normalize the group delay so that it no longer had this like significant increase in group delay suddenly at the crossover point, which I think is the best way to think about what's happening because you're causing a frequency dependent shift in time. And I then tried it on my main system and I also thought it sounded better. And then I shared it with some folks who work in the industry and they were like, no, it's not a bad idea. I mean, for one thing, it doesn't cost anything. It's not like a crazy idea where you're spending all this money on something little. A number of people said that it would surprise them if it was significantly audible and said there's probably other things that are much more audible, like the amplitude response. But in this particular example, we didn't give up anything. We didn't make the amplitude response worse. We didn't give up output. Everything else was constant. We just changed the time delay basically with the subwoofer so that the integration was really smooth. And to be clear, you're not setting it at 0 because many speakers have rising group delay at low frequencies anyway, including those Klipsch. And so you're trying to make the integration smooth and consistent, but not necessarily zero it all out. So I did that on multiple systems, thought it was better, had some confirmation from some folks. Some folks disagreed. James disagreed. I think he still disagrees. But another number of folks felt like it was not a bad idea. I've just made it a part of my approach at this point. And very recently, a friend of mine, I met him through Cedia. He works for Paradigm. He does, I think, software development maybe for them, something like that. And he's got his own measurement software. I'm going to see him at Cedia this year, actually. So maybe I'll get a little brief, short video with him or something. And in his video, it was basically like REW. It was designed to be a sophisticated measurement software that allows you to calculate the DSP settings to optimize the system. And it's meant for multi-way speakers. And one of the key tools it has is it has a wavelet applet that basically optimizes the time domain performance of the speaker through the wavelet. And when he told me that, I was like, well, I do that with REW. And he's like, well, it's a great idea. So basically, here's another guy who's very, very smart, wrote software very much like REW, but it's more capable yet. And it basically has something. So there's this tool in REW that lets you align like any speaker, but a subwoofer and a main, for instance. And it automatically does it based on phase or impulse response, and you can do it on phase angle or actual phase. And then for the impulse response, I think it's the timing of the peak of the impulse response. And he has a tool like that, but he also has a tool that does the wavelet. And basically what you do is you optimize all of those. And then what happens is the phase will be a little bit off. When the amplitude response is its best, and the peak energy is at its best, there's always going to still be a little bit of phase error there. It just seems to always work that way. And what you do is you just add a little bit of correction to that, which can be done through FIR filters, but it also can be done pretty simply with, oh my goodness, all-pass filters. There we go, with an all-pass filter. And so his app will calculate the all-pass filter to correct the phase, and then you get the perfect response, basically, that you would get. And that was effectively an automated version of what I was doing manually in REW. So I was like, way cool. So I know Simpson didn't ask a question, but I thought I'd answer it as to why I've made that a part of mine. And I've shown it to other people, and I'm yet to have anybody be like, that's completely idiotic. There's no reason to do that. It's wrong. It seems like the more knowledgeable people I ask about it, the more they agree that it's a good idea. The most I've ever heard as a negative is that given the time you put into it, the sound that improvement you get from it would range somewhere between inaudible and barely audible. From a research standpoint, we have no idea if that's true or not, because certainly research had shown that group delay was audible, and the amount of error in the group delay, which came from the really seriously thing, is actually pretty significant. The delay is quite large, and so it falls well within the range of what we would call audible delay. But nobody's ever researched exactly what I'm doing. Like, nobody ever studied that. I'd be very curious to try to do that study. I just have no idea how you would set that up reliably. But it would be interesting. All right. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks for watching the video. Thank you for the donation. Even $2 is helpful and makes for great content too, right? So thank you. Keep watching. Subscribe to my channel. Like these videos. And we got more coming.